original war design for newbies. Written by Now Now No on the 22nd of January 2024. Let's begin. What you will need for this tutorial: an attention to details, a coffee, a resource pack available in the description of this video, a legal license of Bryce 7.1 Pro that you installed on your computer already, of course. First thing first, start Bryce. Navigate to File, New Document. Set the resolution to be 850 by 850 and make sure to uncheck any anti-aliasing settings. Original War's terrain textures were rendered without any anti-aliasing. Enabling them will not only make your terrains look odd for the game, but it will also drastically increase the rendering time of your scenes. And let me tell you, Bryce takes forever to render any given thing. Some basics. In Bryce, you use different viewpoints. We will be focusing on two of these, the director view and the camera view. You can navigate between one another by clicking on this button right here, Perspective Toggle. The chair icon means that you are currently using the director view, which we are using to modify our project as a whole, while the camera view will be used only to render the end result. In other terms, we won't ever move the camera view as to preserve the perspective of original War, and instead we will interact with the world we create using the director view. Whenever we will want to create a render of our hard work, we will switch back to the camera view before rendering. Creating your first basic terrain and applying a texture from the resource pack. Bryce gives us the possibility to create different kind of objects. By default, every new project starts with a land terrain that applies a flat texture on the ground. We will be working with another type of objects called terrains. Go ahead and select the land object and delete it. Now click on the terrain icon to create a new object. Using the director viewpoint, select your new terrain and make sure to place it in the center of your scene. You can follow the instructions displayed on the screen. Set up its coordinates to 0. Finally, give it the following dimensions: 100 for width and height, and 25 for depth. Since the depth of your terrain has been modified, you will need to click on the upwards arrow icon to place it back on the ground level. Once you're done with that, it's time to apply a texture to your terrain. You may do so by selecting your terrain and pressing the M icon right here, which stands for Material. This opens up a new, scary interface. But do not worry, I'll guide you through the very basics. Press this button on the right of the texture preview to open up the Materials library. Then click on the button on the bottom left corner, in this case Architectural, and choose User. Click on the plus icon to create a new library. Give it the name you want, such as Original War Textures Pack, and click on Import before selecting the resource pack you downloaded in the description of this video. Let's now apply a texture to your terrain. In the newly created category of textures that you imported just now, select NAS-RU23 Scaly and confirm. Your terrain now has one of the textures from Original War applied onto it. If you move the director viewpoint a little to focus on the terrain itself and render, using this button, you will be able to see it with your own eyes. However, you will have to go through more steps to get your terrain to look just right for the game. The importance of setting the right camera angle to match Original War's perspective, and how to do so. In this part of the tutorial, we are going to modify the camera viewpoint so that whenever you wish to render your scene, you will be able to switch from the director viewpoint to the camera viewpoint and render directly without any more issues. To do so, switch to the camera viewpoint and double-click on this button. This opens up a window with different parameters, the coordinates of the camera and its rotation. Take a moment to pause the video and apply these parameters to your camera settings. Congratulations! Your camera is now ready to be used for rendering, but here's more work for you. You may have noticed that things don't look quite right yet in your rendered scene. This is due to two main issues: the global atmospherics, because Bryce has a dedicated Skylab, and the height map of your terrain. Allow me thus to introduce you to the next chapter. Setting up the sky parameters, or how to perfect Original War's global atmosphere and shadows on your terrains. Years of tweaking the settings in the Skylab, and to be honest, trying random things over and over again, have led me to select what seems to be the perfect sky settings for Original War. In the archive you downloaded before, you should find a .hdri file. You will need to import it to your Skylab. To do so, open the Skylab by pressing this button and click on the triangle icon on the right of the preview box on the right of the interface. Then, create a new category and give it a name of your choice, such as Original War, and import the HDRI file by clicking on Import. Your scene should now look much closer to the style of the terrains in Original War. However, before rendering and trying it out, let's modify your terrain object so that it matches a more fitting style, similar to how a map in the game is built. Click on your terrain and press the E icon. This opens up a new interface that allows you to modify the height map of your terrain. A height map consists of a black and white image, where white defines the highest point of elevation and black the lowest.
A height map in computer graphics is a type of image where each pixel represents a height. The values stored in each pixel, such as surface elevation data, are used for creating 3D models of terrain. In a height map, black usually represents the minimum height and white represents the maximum height. This allows us to visualize and manipulate geographical data in a simple and efficient way.
At the moment, your terrain height map should have a rather messy look, but I am glad to inform you that there is an incredible way to make it resemble Original War. Click on the triangle icon next to the fractal option and select Lava. Then left-click once on the dot to apply a new height map to your terrain. Try and look for something that doesn't look too crazy, such as this one. When you're happy with the result, confirm the modification and render your scene. You may tweak the parameters a little to obtain something you like more. Observe the following clip to get an idea of what you can do, such as changing the terrain's texture, or even modifying the HDRI effect value to influence the global lighting of your terrain. Be careful as to not modify any other setting in the Skylab, as you may break Bryce and you would need to start over. Let's now look at the rendering options. Rendering options, or how to make proper use of a soon-to-be rendered scene. Before rendering your scene and use it in Original War, you should change a few settings in Bryce. Go ahead and click on the triangle icon below the rendering bubbles and select Rendering Options. Take the time to pause the video and apply the same settings as seen right here. Then, go back to the previous menu and select High in Priority to make Bryce render slightly faster. You may now try the Render to Disk option. Make sure to switch to the camera viewpoint. When you open up this menu, Bryce is going to ask you for a resolution. It is the resolution of the image it is going to create for you based on the canvas in your project. If your project is 850 per 850 and you select 1700 per 1700 in the Render to Disk resolution, this means that the terrain that your camera sees will be rendered with a better quality because the scene will be zoomed in and Bryce is going to generate details for it. Here is a comparison of a 850 per 850 project that is rendered in 850 per 850, another one rendered in 1500 per 1500, and another one rendered in 3000 per 3000. Keep in mind that the scale value in your camera object may be changed. Decreasing its value will make the camera see further away as to cover more terrain parts. Increasing it will bring the view closer to the terrain. You can also change the project's resolution as opposed to the Render to Disk resolution in the Document Setup option. Note that you may also want to change the depth of your terrain. To do so, navigate to the Attributes menu of your terrain like you've seen before, and modify its Y size. If you increase it, your terrain will be more defined. However, be mindful of not choosing a value that is too high, for it may look too extreme. Here is an animated showcase of a terrain going from 0 in Y size to 50. Do not forget to push the arrow icon to bring back your terrain on the ground level after altering its Y size value. The art of creating water, and later on, how to animate it. To create water, you will need to create a new terrain. Go ahead and copy the existing terrain and paste it on top of it using Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V. Give the new terrain an appropriate name and the following dimensions: 125 per 25 per 125. You can also assign your terrain to a new family by clicking on the square icon and renaming the family as desired for better organization of your project. After this, open the height map editor of your new water terrain and apply a new fractal effect of your choice to it, such as lava. Do this for both the first frame of your project and the last one if you want to try animating your water. If you'd prefer to render just one picture, only edit one frame on the timeline, preferably the first one. To confirm your new terrain modifications on the timeline, press the plus icon right here. Then, go to the other end of your timeline and apply, as previously said, a new fractal effect. And save it. You can navigate through the timeline to get an idea of how the water is going to move. If you look at the 3D render, use this icon right here to expand the timeline view. Let's now set up the water material. Before navigating to the materials library, move the water terrain slightly higher than the ground terrain. Then select a type of water, for example this one, and confirm. You can use the tiny preview on the top left corner of your screen to get an idea of your water elevation. For now, move it to the height of your choice. Since we are animating it, do not forget to save your modification on the timeline. Let's now switch to the camera view and render our terrain to see if this looks fine. If you are happy with the result, let's move on to another step of water animation. Water is supposed to move. So, adjust the position of your water terrain to be slightly offset of the ground terrain. We will create a movement in the animation where the water terrain goes back and forth. Repeat the operation for the other side of the timeline, in which you will put the water terrain at the opposite end. Do not forget to save the changes on the timeline on every modification. If you move around the timeline, it should look like this. Now is a good time to save your project before rendering. If you do not want to render the whole animation, simply follow the previous steps and render to disk. If you want to render the animation, check out the Animation Setup window beforehand and select how many frames per second you'd like to have. Be aware that the following project you see on screen took 2 hours to render at a frame rate of 60 at a low resolution. Animating in Bryce is a very difficult task, for it will always take a crazy long time. Here is a high-resolution render you could end up with. To render the animation, simply click on the Render Animation option after confirming the settings in Animation Setup. Of course, don't forget to switch to the camera view before rendering. Positives, negatives, intersects. A more complex approach to design your terrains. In this part of the tutorial, we will reach a more complex aspect of Bryce, which you may find useful for your maps. Bryce allows you to play with some terrain attributes, notably positives, negatives, and intersects. A positive terrain will be influenced by the two others, like some sort of 3D masks. We are going to use these attributes to separate our water and ground into two different layers. First thing first, remove the previous water terrain you created and copy and paste your ground terrain again. Rename it to water and make sure its attribute stays on neutral. You may also want to make sure that the ground terrain is set to be positive. Open its height map, editor, and draw a plain gray area all over. Place the water terrain at your desired height so that it shows up on your ground terrain. When you're happy with the result, copy and paste the water terrain, rename it to mask, and check the negative attribute. Do not check the other optional option. Finally, select the following objects: mask and terrain, and click on the G icon to group them together. Only objects which are grouped together are allowed to interfere between one another based on their attributes. If you switch to the camera view, you can see a first mask that should only contain water or ground. Let's now select the mask terrain, and instead of negative, we're going to apply the intersect attribute. Go back to the camera view and render. There you go. You can see the other layer of your terrain. But what happens if we go even further away? You see, in Bryce, every terrain is made of a thin variable layer that has no real depth. If you wanted to dig into your ground terrain, it would open up to the void because there is nothing under its very thin surface. Let's change that and use it to our advantage. The holy grail of real depth in Bryce, and how to dig in even further. To enable us to bring more complex editing and thus details to our terrains, let's introduce a real depth to your terrain. To do so, start with only the terrain you've previously made. Navigate to its height map editor and select Solid. In the Attributes menu, have your terrain temporarily display as a square. Then create a cube object of the same dimensions, which you will place under the terrain, slightly colliding with the terrain. Do not hesitate to use the director viewpoint to make sure things look right. After you're done with this, and in this exact order, select your terrain object, then press Shift and select the cube object. Navigate to the Materials library and hit Confirm. Congratulations! You just copied the texture of the terrain over to the cube Now, set the attributes of both objects to be positive and group them together. From there, you'll be able to hit the C icon to transform them into a single object. And in such a way, you have an object which we can experiment with a bit more. Let's continue this and see where this is going. Select your new object and set its attribute to be positive. This will make it so other objects can influence it. Now, how about digging into the ground? To do so, create a symmetrical lattice object. This is like the terrain object, except it goes both ways, upside down. You can edit its height map just like that of a terrain. Set its coordinates to the center of your scene, and using the director view, move it in a way that it collides with the top surface of the first terrain object. Now, give it the negative attribute without checking the optional setting, and select both the terrain and your lattice before grouping them together. See how the lattice object digs a hole in your terrain. By using such methods, you can thus put more efforts into fine-tuning the design of your dream. For example, you could add water in this hole. But what happens if you give the lattice object some texture, and then check the secondary setting of the negative attribute? Let's see. Pick any other texture of your choice, then check the setting. As you can see, the lattice's texture is now applying to your terrain. You've just invented 3D painting in a way. Lastly, the intersect option may also be used here if you want to focus on a certain area. As you've seen before, intersect means that whichever part of your object being covered by your lattice will be kept visible, while anything else will be removed. Imagine what you could do should you have dozens of different objects and masks influencing one another. Stones in Bryce. Except I'll kill you if you use these stones. Creating rocks to be used in original war isn't particularly an easy task to do in Bryce. You might have noticed that you can create a stone object in your scene. However, the issue is that you cannot shape it however you'd like. So instead, we are going to stick to our good old terrain object, and you are going to use a brand new method that will make the task much easier. Select your terrain and give it the following dimensions: 50, 10, 50. Make sure it is positioned in the middle of your scene, then navigate to its height map editor. From there, click on the grid icon right there and choose 256. Apply a Cauliflower Hills fractal effect a few times until you get something similar to this, with uniformly created patches of elevations. Now the magic happens. Open the secret menu by clicking right here and move this thing, starting from the bottom, until the height map gets cropped at a certain height. By doing so, you are telling Bryce to only keep this range of elevation for that one terrain and get rid of the lower part. That way, only the rocks you are selecting will show up in your scene. If necessary, do not hesitate to play with the raise or lower option or create a new height map. If you create a new height map, remember to reset the elevation scale limiter, or whatever you'd call that. If you do not reset it, only the part currently selected will be changed. If the rocks do not look very defined, start over or raise or lower the depth value of your terrain. By the way, if needed, you can also create special cliffs by lowering the maximum elevation scale limiter of your terrain in a way that resembles this. Next step, let's apply a texture to our rocks. Feel free to pick a few and see which one best matches the style you're after. Observe the following clip to get an idea of what you can do to make things look right, such as changing the IBL settings. Then, before rendering to disk, let's adjust the depth value of our terrain to make sure the rocks look appropriate. If you're happy with the result, give it a try and render to disk. You can select a higher resolution in the rendering option to make your rocks more detailed if needed.